Welcome everyone for joining NYU Washington, D.C., NYU Buenos Aires, and the Amazon Aid Foundation for this event to recognize Earth Day 2022. My name is Erica Wu, and I am a junior at NYU Abu Dhabi, double majoring in interactive media and social research and public policy. Currently, I am at NYU Buenos Aires, where I have been learning about the climate crisis and environmentalism here in Argentina and in Latin America. The theme of this year's Earth Day is Invest in Our Planet, emphasizing the need to direct our attention and investment in our planet on a wider scale. The Amazon is the world's largest rainforest. It has been referred to as the planet's lungs due to its vitality for the planet's stability and well-being. It has also been compared to a giant air conditioner that cools the planet, which is essential for mitigating climate change. Its biodiversity and the lives it sustains is a treasure unlike any other. This is why we are here today to discuss the Amazon rainforest and the impact law and policy around minerals and gold mining have on protecting the global environment. Participants of this event had the opportunity to watch the informative and powerful documentary film River of Gold by the Amazon Aid Foundation. The documentary has presented a disturbing account of the destruction of Peru's Amazon rainforest caused by illegally mined gold, causing apocalyptic destruction of this critical region and its transformation into a wasteland. This documentary reaffirms the right of the rainforest to exist as a repository of priceless biodiversity and not as the toxic remains of humanity's greed for gold. Human beings are prone to take things for granted, only appreciating them when they're gone. We have often taken for granted the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the climate we enjoy, which are all provided by nature and our environment, such as the Amazon. Yet, we cannot afford its destruction because it impacts the necessities of all living beings like ourselves. The Amazon is our first line of defense against the climate crisis. If it falls, we fall with it. Because as part of the same planet, we are interdependent. We are the Earth, which means that harming nature or the Amazon is essentially just harming ourselves. Fast approaching a tipping point, beyond which the rainforest will lose the ability to sustain itself, our discussion today will focus on the actions that must be taken to restore our connection with the rainforest before it's too late. Once again, thanks to everyone for joining us today, and let me hand it over to our moderator for tonight, Salo Koslowski.
Thanks, Erica. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to introduce myself briefly, and then I'm going to I don't know if Erica is going to do that, or if I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to open up and have a conversation. My name is Sal Koslowsky. I'm an associate professor of urban planning and public service at NYU, based out of New York, where I'm calling from now. I'm originally from Brazil, in São Paulo, which is quite far from the Amazon, but I've been doing work in that region for the past 20 years or so. And over the past 2 years, even more intensively, I've been part of a large research project that congregates a fairly large number of Brazilian researchers devoted to developing a blueprint for local economic development in the region. And to me, it's a great pleasure because I'm going to ask the panelists all the questions that usually people ask me, and then I'm going to just hand it over to them and see what they have to say, and then take that into my toolbox. So this is a great pleasure and a privilege. So first, to get started, I'm not sure if Erica is going to come back, or if we just get people to introduce themselves. Let's go. So one by one, I'm going to start with Charlie, then Maria Valeria, and then Ben. Does that sound right?
That sounds great. Thank you, Salo and Erica, for the introduction, and to NYU so much for inviting me and Amazon Aid on this panel. My name is Charlie Espinosa. I work as a research consultant with the Amazon Aid Foundation. So I thought maybe I would say how I started working for Amazon Aid. So before I started working with Amazon Aid, I was working for another organization with whom I still work for, named Pure Earth. So Pure Earth leads a project in the Peruvian Amazon, in Madre de Dios, where the documentary also took place. Basically trying to support miners to try to improve their mining methods and reduce mercury use and try to increase reforestation in the area. So that's how I got introduced to this issue. And then I became interested after watching River of Gold in the work Amazon Aid is doing. So what Amazon Aid does is basically try to raise global awareness about issues that the Amazon's facing. And in particular, Amazon Aid's done a lot of work around gold mining in the Amazon, both through River of Gold and through the Cleaner Gold Network. So basically, I think that this issue, one thing that interests me about it is that it's not just an issue that is out there in Peru and another country. It's something that we're in consumer countries very involved in through the supply chain, because the demand for gold is driving gold rushes in other places. And so that's how I started working with Amazon Aid, because I was admired the way that they were trying to raise awareness in the developed world in particular. So I'll pass it off now.
Thanks, Charlie. Maria Valeria, would you like to give us a quick introduction?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. My name is Maria Valeria Berros. I am professor at Universidad Nacional del Litoral in Argentina. I'm a researcher in CONICET, that is the national council that make the research here in my country. I am working on right of nature, and I think that is the reason that I am here, because it's one of the new approaches, the new legal approaches that is coming out in Latin America and in other parts of the world. I think there are many relations we can establish with different parts of the documentary and different problems on the documentary that are, well, happening there in the Amazonia and in many other parts of Latin America and other places in the world. So I am very grateful to be here and to share with you 1 hour of discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Ben?
Hi, yeah, thank you for the invite and the opportunity to be here. My name is Ben Vauder, and I work for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of International and Tribal Affairs within the Office of Global Affairs and Policy. And so I'm based in Washington, D.C. In my role, I focus on broadly the supporting the global implementation of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, which is a new legally binding agreement led by the UN Environment Program that promotes reduction and elimination of mercury across products and processes around the world. Artisanal and small-scale gold mining is the leading source of mercury emissions globally, and so is a big part of the focus of my work for the EPA. And similar to what Charlie mentioned, the U.S. is a big gold buying country. We import a decent amount of gold, and then a lot of the products that we consume here contain gold. And so looking at ways to engage through supply chains to reduce mercury emissions and other social environmental impacts along global gold supply chains.
Fantastic, thank you. So for those, I would imagine that many or most of the attendees watched the documentary, which I highly recommend. I saw it fully earlier today. It's 1 hour long. I think the link and the password is either it's an email or it's the page, or you can ask the organizers, they can share with you. But one of the key elements, Mercury, I've known about, let me take a step back. Gold mining is one of the many problems that affect the Amazon. The Amazon is a very diverse, not only very large, but very diverse in terms of its features and the challenges it faces. And gold is one of the many problems. So it's just dealing with it is very important, but it's not, there's many villains in this story. And the big villain one of the big villains in the gold mining story is Mercury, which gets disposed in the environment and gets vaporized and goes into the clouds and rains back and poisons everything, the trees, the plants, the fish, the people. And I was very struck, and I never knew, and I still don't know, and that's what I want to ask Ben, who produces mercury, how the mercury is produced, and what's the mercury trade look like? I don't know if, I imagine that you would know that, but I would be very curious to learn more, not about the gold, which we can have a sense of intuition, but mercury seems very mysterious.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I mean, I think we have a decent conceptual view of what the mercury supply chain looks like and where mercury is coming from. I mean, mercury is mined from the earth as what's called cinnabar, essentially mercury sulfide, and you can extract liquid mercury from the cinnabar rock that you would mine out of the ground. And
sorry, and who does it? Where is it done?
It's so it's outlawed by the Minamata Convention, so it's no longer supposed to be happening. I believe that's right, or it's about to be fully outlawed.
So no more mercury mining, that's illegal.
There's a little bit happening, I think, informally, mostly in Mexico and Indonesia right now that we know of. And so those supply chains are very informal and illicit. Similar, they're directly linked to the illicit and informal trade of gold. So yeah, a lot of it is happening informally, and you know, those are two countries that we've heard of. I'm sure it's happening elsewhere, but that's for primary mercury mining that's happening. But a lot of the mercury that we know comes into ASGM, or artisanal small scale gold mining, is also coming from, since we have the Minamata Convention, there's mercury being eliminated and reduced from large industries or products. And so if that mercury can't be used anymore, what are they going to do with it? And there's not a lot of storage or disposal capacity around the world to actually manage the mercury that the Minamata Convention is trying to take out of circulation. And so that's been ending up making its way into artisanal small scale gold mining also.
So it's also illegal, mostly illegal, and mostly being smuggled in small, it cannot be that small quantities, I mean.
Well, I mean, small in size is pretty heavy. So like, yeah, and it doesn't, I mean, yeah, the quantities, I think, it's hard to say. Again, like it being an informal sector, it's hard to really track exactly how much is going where and from where. I don't have great data on that, and I don't think anyone really does. The Global Environment Facility is about to start, which is the financial mechanism for the Minamata Convention. It's kind of the implementation financial source to implement projects for the convention, is about to start a project in Latin America that looks at this exact question of where is mercury coming from and how is it flowing? What are the trade flows within the Latin America from Mexico down to South America? So where is it being mined? And then where is it flowing to, and what's it being used for? And so hopefully from that project, we'll have some better data to share with folks. But at this point, it's pretty mysterious.
That's so interesting. I mean, I maybe I shouldn't date myself this much, but we had thermometers made with mercury in it, and every now and then they would break, me and my brothers, and would play with the mercury. And we go to the dentist, and they used mercury for fillings. We would walk out to the dentist with a little thing of mercury to play with. And today sounds like you're playing with uranium or some sort of materials.
Yeah. I will make one extra point on that. Is that mercury is also a byproduct of non-ferrous metals mining. So mercury is used for small-scale artisanal gold mining to extract the gold from the ore, but it's actually produced as a byproduct from large and medium-scale non-ferrous metal mining, and pretty large amounts of it actually. And so that is a potential source of mercury making its way to artisanal small-scale gold mining. just make that caveat.
No, yeah, no, very interesting. Thank you. Charlie, you went there, right, to Puerto Maldonado, and you visited those places as well.
I did, yeah. That was in 2019. It was actually through my work with the organization I mentioned before, Pure Earth, which is a organization that focuses on pollution, and in particular lead and mercury. So that's why they started focusing on this issue. But yeah, so I went down there in 2019 and visited a community of gold miners who we were working with. I didn't see a lot of seeing the documentary is always so shocking, because you see the scenes, even in the gold mining community, it is shocking because gold mining has a very strong impact. But when you see the documentary, the level of devastation is so immense. And I actually wasn't in those areas where those huge long mining corridors.
And I understand that there has been ups and downs. I mean, the documentary itself shows the kind of a little before and after, when it was, in a sense, unbridled, unrestrained, and eventually there was a crackdown. And I understand the same in Brazil. Every now and then there's an eruption of small-scale gold mining in the Brazilian Amazon, and every now and then it goes away and it comes back. Do you have any sense of what the trends are and what's driving this ups and downs in this sector?
Yes. I mean, I would say that globally, there's been a very big spike in artisanal and small scale gold mining that corresponds to the rise in the 2000s to the rise of the global gold price of gold. But in Peru specifically, I think there are a couple different things you can point to that led to a really big gold rush. The first is there was a highway built called the Inter-Oceanic Highway in, I think, 2010 or so, that goes from the Atlantic coast of Brazil to the coast, the Pacific coast of Peru, and it crosses through the Amazon and it crosses through this region of Madre de Dios. So when this highway was built, all of a sudden a lot of people had access to the Amazon that didn't have this part of the Amazon that people didn't have access to before. So it led to this sort of mass migration of, largely very poor, marginalized people from the Andean mountains of Peru primarily into the Peruvian Amazon, and sort of led to this mass gold rush that caused all the environmental devastation that you saw in the documentary. Since then, there has been in Peru a big government crackdown called Operation Mercury. It happened, I think it started in 2019. And basically the Peruvian military just went in and really did a big crackdown on illegal mining. And since then, the amount of deforestation has gone down quite a bit. So yeah, that's the current status, although I think that there's some evidence that it kind of gets pushed out to other areas outside, where it was before.
So kind of a whack-a-mole kind of problem.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The kind of a whack-a-mole dynamic.
You
press it here, it moves somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's always like this. It's very, very tough. I'm not sure if Maria Valeria is being able to follow us, or can you hear us at all? No. Can we hear you?
I'm following the text. We did hear her before, so.
Exactly. Let's see if I can draw her in. Yeah, let's be a little patient, see if she can bring her in here. As we wait, let's see if yes, let's hear her. Maria Valeria, can you hear us? I don't think she's. So, Charlie, as we wait or try to handle this, you said that one of the lines of work that you do is trying to improve the techniques of the artisanal mining. Can you tell us what that looks like?
Sure, yeah. So that's with not with Amazon Aid, but with or an organization called Pure Earth that I mentioned before. So we talked before about the use of mercury in gold mining. There are methods to mine gold at the artisanal and small scale that don't use mercury, that are actually in some cases more efficient. And it's difficult for a couple of reasons. One, because sometimes this technology can be a little bit more expensive, and the other because miners just aren't used to it. But basically what Pure Earth is doing is
sorry, can you give us do you know what the technology look like?
Yeah, so there's many different types of technology that I guess sort of goes, most of it is what's called gravimetric mining. And so what miners normally do is they mix mercury with ore to pull out the gold, because mercury has an affinity for gold, and then they burn off the mercury gold amalgam, and then they have a purified gold piece left over. But there are techniques that use different what's called concentration methods to get the gold refined to a purified state without using mercury. So in the case of the project that we're working on in Madre Dios, we've used what's called a shaking table. And a shaking table is a method that basically it's the technology that uses the heavier weight of gold to get to sort of concentrate it and get it out of the ore. And what you get is this really fine gold dust that miners can then have recovered. So that's one part of the work that they're doing, but the other part is helping miners to do a mine closure. So that means that, you saw the sort of destruction that happens after miners mine out the land, but they're in theory supposed to be doing a mine closure that involves some kind of reforestation. So another thing that Pure Earth is doing is training miners in appropriate reforestation methods, so that after they mine, they can, instead of just leaving out these sort of massive mined out mining pools and destructive landscapes, they can reforest the area so that it can regenerate over time.
Do you or Ben, I mean, I leave it open. Do you know of any place that has been, based on what I saw in the movie and what I know about this sector, it's very, it's the definition of wildcat, free for all, each man for himself, and negative externality for everybody else. Destroy as much as you can, as fast as you can, as long as you can get some money out of it. But the miners themselves, they have an interest in organizing it somewhat, in making it less crazy, less wild, more stable, in which they can actually raise a family and send the kids to school and not live in the middle of nowhere for so long. Maybe kind of put a little bit of structure and order to that exploration, not to stamp it out, of course, would be ideal from the point of view of nature, but at least keep it in manageable, have good jobs, environmental standards, reforestation at the end, maybe have a cooperative running it, maybe having a big business that hires then these miners, these individuals as workers. I'm curious if there is examples elsewhere that, if you know of, in which this was done in a more organized fashion.
Yeah, Ben, do you want to answer? And I can
Sure.
go after if I want to add anything.
Yeah, I'll answer. I don't know if I'm going to have a straightforward answer. I might just add more like issues and questions and maybe contextualize why this doesn't happen in a more organized fashion, and maybe also add some more color commentary to the point about externalities and where those are really coming from. Um, so under the Minamata Convention, and I mean, there's been efforts to work with artisanal and small scale gold mining communities to stop their use of mercury, and then to, you know, improve the situation with labor and human rights issues that are present sometimes in certain mining areas. This has been going for maybe like 20 years now. There have been efforts to try and formalize the sector. So I think what you're asking about, is there an example of a good formalized artisanal small scale gold mining operation that's out there? And I don't know that actually really is the case, that there is a perfect gold mine out there. I think that there are a lot of gold mines that are in the process of formalizing, meaning coming out of kind of this black market economy into a formal economy, which means that they have access to a formal global supply chain, which right now the artisanal small scale gold mining produces about 20% of the world's gold informally, and is supplying that gold to global supply chains. So, you know, the big tech companies that are using gold in our phones are buying 20% of the gold that they're getting is coming from artisanal small scale gold mining. So I would argue that those externalities are coming from those companies that do not have formal supply chains. Essentially, if they're not able to tell us where they're getting their gold from, which they're not able to tell us. They have thousands of refiners around the world, and they don't keep tabs on where those refiners are getting their gold from. And then those refiners can't tell you where they're getting their gold from. They know one exporter in a country that they get their gold from, but then that exporter can't tell them where that gold came from, and that gold probably came from some sort of forced labor camp or just a small scale enterprise that was producing gold using mercury, and then it gets informally aggregated up the supply chain by an informal network of transporters and traders that makes its way to an exporter in the country and sells it to a refiner. And again, coming back to the question, I don't know that there is a perfect artisanal small scale gold mine out there. The only way that it could be is if it's connected to a formal gold supply chain downstream section that is actually has those requirements of the miners, which it really ultimately doesn't at this point.
But sorry, Ben, so I just keeping it informal, so you're going to interrupt every now and then.
Yeah, fine.
I hope you don't mind. I mean, perfect is very high bar. I was not aiming for, perfect would be good, but it just, so I have a few questions here. One is, you said 20% come from small scale.
Yeah.
So 80% comes from some sort of much more structured, high capital intensive, big multinational mining.
Right.
Is the difference because where the gold resides and how it can be explored? Sort of, you have to dig a hole that you need big machines as opposed to.
Oh, so is it what is
why some are structured in a big business, properly licensed, properly monitored kind of way, and the others are very fragmented? Is it the condition of the gold itself or something else that defines this?
I think it's a mixture of things. So a lot of these the large scale mining companies are multinational companies. Many of them, coming from like Canada or the US, for example, that are mining in territories that are not theirs. And so they have this prospecting ability to show like what areas have the highest grade ore. And so they make those economic decisions for themselves that it's like the cost benefit analysis of mining this area. It's worth it. Small scale miners may see that there's a large scale mine there, and so that's a signal that there is some sort of gold available under the ground, and they're very poor people, right? Like the people that are doing artisanal small scale gold mining are extremely impoverished. Small scale gold mining is, especially using mercury, is not something that you choose to do if you have other options. And So they may set up next to a large scale mine and end up mining the lower grade ores, but that's good for them because that's better than nothing. Or, you know, there may just be a history of an area. You know, there could be traditional mining that's happening. Maybe an area has been mined for, you know, hundreds of years by indigenous peoples, and they've just been doing simple panning techniques in rivers. And actually that's perfectly fine if they're not using mercury. Issue is that mercury ends up getting involved, and so it complicates things. But yeah, there are various reasons why large scale mining may happen in an area and small scale mining happens in an area. But yeah, and the processes are very different. Large scale, medium scale mining is you know, equipment heavy, and small scale artisanal mining is not equipment heavy. It's low capital intensive. You know, and it's informal. I don't know if that really answers your question.
That's in the direction I was going. The one I know a little about is this famous mining in the north of Brazil, Serra Pelada. In the 80s was the massive gold rush of informal, small, decentralized gold mining. And you have a famous set of photographs by Sebastião Salgado, Brazilian photographer. It just looks like a little bit one of those medieval scenes of people working like covered in mud, just like we saw in the movie. And at some point the government shut it down, and a company came in and started exploiting that gold. And the miners got organized in a union, and it's like highly corrupt, but it's more organized than it was before. So my question is, what does it take to move from organized to disorganized, or vice versa? And whether we see this happening somewhere. I'm trying to grasp at what are the levers that leads to keep this happening, because suppressing totally seems very difficult, but mitigate the damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if others want to jump in here. I mean, I think there's a lot of responses to the questions that you're asking, and there's not, I guess I'm finding myself rambling a little bit because there is a lot to tie together. Mm-hmm.
No, that's fine. I'm taking this as a conversation. I don't see it as rambling at all.
Okay.
And Maria Valeria is back. Let's see if her microphone is working. Can you hear us? Can we hear you? Your microphone is off. I can see that. I don't know if you can hear us. Not sure if it's working. And people who are watching us, and now we're having a little conversation, but as soon as in a few minutes, we're gonna open it up. So feel free to add your questions to the Q&A, and then we're gonna look at that and send them to the panelists. So don't be shy. Send your questions. I've been lobbying all kinds of, I told them that would be easy questions. I'm just asking away all kinds of super complicated questions anyway. But
they're really good questions.
Yeah,
it's hard to pin down one answer. But
and also, is there? Related question: is there a place that we can look at it said they are not as bad?
Sure. I mean, I would say that. So there have been a lot of sort of local examples, most of which there's a lot of examples of organizations supporting miners. So one thing is what Ben mentioned before, is that you have miners who are really at the artisanal level doing things like panning, and have done so for a long time. And the idea is not to, in many cases, that's not a destructive livelihood, and you want to support that kind of tradition. I would also say that there are certainly small scale examples. I was going to say before that, in the case of, we were talking about formalization before and legalization. In the case of Madre Dios, Peru, there are now the number is still pretty small, but there's now 200 or 300 miners who work legally and have been formalized. Whereas before, when the stuff was going on that you see in the documentary, actually 100% of gold miners at that time were working illegally. So I think that there is some, there are sort of like isolated movements in the right direction. But doing it on a large scale, I think progress has been very slow.
But legal is a sort of murky. Does it mean that they pay taxes, or does it mean that they don't use mercury, or does it mean that they don't deforest where they shouldn't, or that they reforest at the end, they get a license? What do you know what it means in this case?
Yes, it depends on what country you're in. And you're right that, legalization doesn't mean that things like environmental impacts are eliminated, but it means potentially a start to having some regulation of the sector. But yes, so I mean, paying taxes is one element. In the case of Peru is one of the few countries, I think, maybe the only one that I'm aware of in South America, Ben might be able to correct me on this, but that requires miners to submit an environmental management plan when they, apply for a mine and then close it. So in theory, they're supposed to be laying out steps to make sure that their environmental impact is mitigated, that they're doing mine closure. The problem is that in terms of enforcement, there's been very little of this, and miners can still, even formalized ones, there's really little enforcement of that legislation, but it does exist. And I think you can say that it's the beginning of, trying to make sure that there's some sort of responsible standards in place. And then there's a lot of different laws, I think, that would come into play here. I don't know what other ones to go into right now. In most countries, so their use of mercury, in a place like Peru, mercury is still legal to use, actually. But there are, I think, laws that dictate that you're doing it in a somewhat controlled way. And then in other countries, like in Colombia, for example, mercury use is completely illegal, but that hasn't really done much to stop the total amount of mercury use in Colombia. Colombia is still one of the most mercury contaminated countries in South America.
So which one is Colombia?
Colombia, yeah.
Oh, well, I didn't know.
Yeah, and actually, I would add to that. It's a good point, Charlie. That the U.S. and generally within the Minamata Convention as a policy, we don't really encourage governments to make the use of mercury illegal, because by doing that, you kind of push the activity further underground, and you make miners who are currently using mercury, instead of giving them a window into a process of formalization, you kind of shut them out of that process, and then you criminalize them. So then they end up interacting with the police and military, kind of like enforcing this regulation, making mercury illegal, instead of engaging with communities to in a process to progressively improve their mining practices. And so I will make a plug also for, again, another Minamata Convention tool is what's called Minamata, artisanal small scale gold mining national action plans, which each country who is a party of the convention, of the Minamata Convention, who kind of acknowledges that they have ASGM activities within their territories, are given, I think it's around $200,000 from the Global Environment Facility to develop these ASGM national action plans. And these plans are national plans on how they're going to formalize a gold mining sector within a specific country. And so within that formalization plan, how are they going to reduce the use of mercury? There's public health strategies are a part of that. And so these plans are just starting to be completed and published on the Minamata Convention's website, and should, for individual countries, have a lot of really good information into what are the approaches within that specific country to address the issue of mercury use specifically within their borders. So I would encourage people who are interested to look at that resource, and I can actually find that webpage and post it into the chat if that's interesting for people.
I think that would be great. I'm not sure if participants can see the chat, but maybe the organizers can share this later.
Okay.
Maria Valeria, I understand you're back.
Yes, I am back. Can you listen to me?
Yes, loud and clear.
I can listen to you. Sorry for this inconvenience. Technical problems are always around.
It's okay. We understand. Can you tell us a little, I mean, this right to nature, remember, if I understood this correctly, means that the trees and the rivers themselves have a right to defend themselves in court. Is that what it is?
Yes, a right to exist and to defend themselves in court with a representative, of course. And that is something very important in Latin America, because the first constitution that recognized the right of nature was Ecuador constitutions in 2008. And then Bolivia did something similar with some national law. And now you can find a lot of local regulations and also some judicial decisions too, based on the idea of right of nature or on the idea of biocultural rights too. For example, in Colombia, there is a very famous case related to with the mining and illegal mining in the Rio Atrato. It's not in the Amazonia region, it's in the Atrato region and in the Chocó region where the Atrato River is. And it's a very interesting case because it's a new interpretation on environmental legislation. They don't have the right of nature in the constitution, they don't have the right of nature in a national law, but the Constitutional Court made an interpretation taking into account the ecocentric turn of environmental law in Latin America. And they organized the idea of biocultural rights, making like a relation between right of ecosystems, in particular the Atrato River in this case, and the right of different communities. And it's important to take into account too that the right of nature, in particular in Ecuador and then in Bolivia, is very related with indigenous worldviews that are very related to with the territory and, well, with the different ecosystems in different places in Latin America.
So maybe this is a little too, I don't know if it's too technical or not. I'm just trying to understand what this means, sort of this revolution of the right to nature. Is it was the bottleneck the fact that you couldn't find somebody who could sue on behalf of the trees and the rivers and the atmosphere, and that's why you need the animals and the plants and to have standing, to be able to stand in court by themselves? Or is it an expansion of environmental rights? They have more right, that there's less damage that you can do?
Well, we can say that it's a little bit both things, because you have standing to go to courts and you have to define who is the representative of nature. For example, in these countries, every inhabitant could represent nature before courts. And it's also a process that can be observed like a pluralization on environmental law, because we have the right of to a healthy environment as a human rights, but we also have these new ideas that are emerging specifically in southern countries in Latin America, but also in New Zealand, in some places in Africa that have similar kind of ideas that are related with the idea that we are humans, but we are not the center. We are part of a more extensive nature or ecosystem or whatever. So it's a little bit both. It's like another idea. It's different than the idea of environmental law. It's something related with another kind of relation with environment, we can say.
Very nice. And how well received it is? Where is it advancing the most?
Well, in Ecuador now we have a lot of judicial decisions, and it's the only one country that has the constitution with this idea. But now something very interesting is happening in Chile. They are discussing a new constitution, and they introduced the idea of right of nature in the discussion, and they approve a preliminary version of the constitution that has to be approved later, but introduce the idea of right of nature there. And Bolivia has very interesting regulation on that. The cases in Latin America are, well, we can say that there are many different cases around different countries in Latin America, but Colombia made a very important effort to recognize right of several, specifically rivers, another kind of ecosystem, but rivers are the most important number of decisions. And to me, one experience that it's very interesting is the New Zealand one, between the New Zealand state and the Maori communities. There are a very nice case about national parks and about the Whanganui River. I can recommend you a documentary where these ideas appear. It's called The Right of Nature, a Global Good Movement. It's from 2018 and show a little bit the process of recognition of right of nature in different parts of the world.
Fantastic, thank you. So let me, instead of monopolizing all the questions, and I'm gonna read two questions that came from the audience. And then I also want to open if you can ask questions each other if you feel like. So the first one from Kelly Kimura, asking, are miners being made aware of the health dangers of mercury? And having they seen evidence of it, do they know and do they feel it? That's first part, such as the Minamata disease. And second part of the question, are safer alternative ways to make a living being developed for local and the indigenous people? So not just safe mining, but safe alternatives overall. And I leave it to the panelists to decide if anyone wants to jump in. I might have some perspective on the Brazilian side as well.
I can start. I think there's, and then you all can add on. The short answer is yes. My experience in actually talking to miners is that they are definitely aware. This isn't just a problem of knowledge. It's they are in most cases aware that there's impacts on their health. The one thing about mercury is it's very difficult to say, okay, this is causing these adverse health impacts because it's, you know, sort of works invisibly and attacks organs slowly. But I think the main point to be made is that a lot of miners will say, okay, yes, that is, I know that there's an impact to my health, but what can I do about it? I don't have other options, and mercury is really cheap, and gold mining is really profitable, the most profitable enterprise that I can engage in. So it's not so easy. But in terms of alternative livelihoods, I mean, there have been projects that have tried to do that, I think with varying success, but I think it's definitely, especially over the long term, should be something, you know, and part of the suite of solutions to this problem. They can be difficult because gold mining is often so economically compelling that it's hard to, you know, create, at least in the short term, a sort of a pop-up alternative livelihood project that really works. But I think that it can work, and it should definitely be part of the solution.
So there's an analogy here to be made, I suppose, with drug trafficking, the cocaine and coca farming and production of the paste and so forth, because it was also something that for a long time was very enticing in terms of money. I mean, you could make a lot of money, of course, planting coca leaves and be involved in that supply chain. But my understanding is that through different means, including very heavy-handed repression, that sector got suppressed a lot. At the same time that I understand that Peru, of all places, has a booming agricultural sector. all kinds of fresh fruits and vegetables. The numbers are just astronomical. I don't know if any of you follow this stuff, but it's something that I've been studying. The exports from Peru to the US and to Europe of all kinds of fresh foods and vegetables is just remarkable. Numbers are the billions of dollars for each. You say asparagus, billions of dollars, avocados, billions of dollars, blueberries, each one of those items, it's billions of dollars coming out of Peru. It's just that it's not in the Amazon. A lot of it's in the mountains and in the coast. So the challenge here is to bridge these two worlds, I imagine.
Yeah, now I'll just echo a little bit what Charlie was saying. Well, first off, that's really interesting, Salo. I didn't know about that in Peru.
You just go to the supermarket and read the fine print where the stuff comes from. You're going to see a lot of Peru, a lot of Chile, but a lot of Peru.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And well, I mean, I guess we wouldn't want too much of the agriculture to make its way into the Amazon, though, either, because we want to kind of avoid some deforestation impacts there. So, yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of there's a lot of thought going into creating incentives for miners to stop using mercury or to stop mining altogether, like you're mentioning. And I think the incentives they have to be economic. You know, these again, the communities that are doing this are mostly, poorer communities, or there is that criminal kind of like narco element where, there are militias that are in these areas that are kind of like controlling areas and forcing people to work for them, or extorting people who are working in areas in like exchange for protection. And so there's different dynamics there, but if miners aren't going to make more money through agricultural means, then it's going to be a hard sell. And it has been a hard sell. And that's why a lot of times that approach hasn't worked in the past. I think that it can, and there needs to be a lot more effort put into that and investment put into that. But mining can also be a legitimate livelihood, and I think it's also worth considering that it is a sector that should be supported. That this is a potentially legitimate livelihood that can uplift a lot of people out of poverty if done the right way. But then how do you bring those incentives to miners? How do you incentivize miners moving away from mercury? Like how does essentially the people who are buying the gold from the miners need to say, we'll buy gold, but only if you don't use mercury. We won't buy gold from you if we find out you're using mercury. And we're going to give you a better price for the gold that you give us that isn't mined with mercury. So that type of economic incentive sort of trickling down through gold supply chains is something that is going to be very impactful. But it requires a little bit of I think an approach and mentality shift as far as the global private sector goes in the downstream, where they have this kind of profit maximizing approach, maximize profits, reduce costs, and there's not really a stakeholder approach there, where they are externalizing a lot of the costs to the environment and to those miners and their supply chains, instead of investing and internalizing those costs by investing in their supply chains to ensure that there are better production processes, investing in the miners.
Cool, thank you. And I'm gonna rephrase it slightly for Maria Valeria on this. When the river sues, it gets a lawsuit going against the government for failing to protect it, or against the company that buys the gold, or whoever is the target here. What's the local dynamics? I mean, who is for, who is against it? Who in the local, the workers would lose their job if the lawsuit goes forward, but the neighbors benefit from a cleaner. And how does it manifest itself in local politics? Like who is for, who is against this kind of movement, when nature has the right to speak for itself?
Well, you have some different kind of ways to see this. One is the people that work in the legal file. There are many persons that are against the right of nature because they consider that nature cannot communicate itself in tribunals. But that is a very old idea, but there are many people that still think on that way. And in relation with the conflicts, I think that it's not something maybe very, very different on the conflicts with the environmental arguments, the more traditional environmental arguments, but the new idea that appeared here is that the river is an actor, and that is an actor that is had to take into account in the same way that people that works there and people that want to protect the river are taken into account. So you have like more actors than in the past because you have people and also a non-human actor that it's hard to be represented, but there are many cases where the rivers are represented in courts and decisions are taken, and they decide, for example, to give the river a representative called a guardian. For example, in the case I mentioned, the Trato River now has a guardian. That is the institutional design that the court create to arrive to make effective the decision take about the protection of the Atrato River. The protection of the Atrato River and the population that live in the Atrato River. This is the idea that you can come to a rights perspective.
Fantastic, thank you. So the time is really flying by. I want to give each one of you, so we have here 45 people watching, NYU students, I suppose, from all over the world, to closing statements, your pitch, your hiring interns or junior professionals, whatever you want. The word is, I'm going to give a minute each to Charlie, Ben, and Maria Valeria if you wish to use it.
Okay, I guess I'll go first then do the elevator pitch. So I would just say that, yeah, I mentioned before that this issue is one that really illustrates the way that we're all connected. Gold being a, global commodity or good. And so there are ways that you can get involved with this issue and try to be, make change and improve the situation. And that includes things like if you're buying gold or another gem, knowing what kind of more responsible things to look for and asking the right questions. You can keep asking questions. You could send an email to a jewelry company, for example, asking for more transparency. And we have on Amazon Aid's website more information about how to do that. So rather than go into it all, I'm just going to direct you there. And also just mention that if you're interested in this issue, Amazon Aid has something called the Cleaner Gold Network, which is composed of a lot of different individuals and organizations, from jewelers to artists to NGOs working on this problem. Anyone can join, and we meet quarterly, and it's a really good way to learn more about the issue and also actually learn how you can take action and become involved. So I'm going to put a couple links into the chat, and I hope that you all are inspired to learn more and to activate.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm not sure if the participants can see, but the hosts at some point can share.
Okay, I'll just drop it in the chat, and then the host hopefully can redirect.
Ben?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, first I just appreciate everybody showing up. This is a great turnout. And I guess I would just encourage those watching to, consider that this artisanal small scale gold mining sector, this issue we're talking about, is often approached as like a development sector. It's a classic case of international development work. But people are mining gold. You know, there's inherent value there. And so should it really be a development sector in perpetuity, or is there should this money be coming from somewhere else? Is there some sort of responsible party elsewhere that should be ensuring that this gold mining works better, you know? And so understanding history and the way that corporate supply chains have been sort of externalized or, you know, globalized, since globalization has kind of sped up over the last however many years, really recently, since maybe the 80s, I guess. It's really taken off. There's been this opacity in supply chains that has happened for reasons of efficiency to minimize costs. So you minimize costs by exporting your production to China, for example, where there may not be environmental regulation, and so that reduces costs. And you know, if you don't know where your gold is coming from, there may be forced labor, and so there's no labor costs really calculated into where your gold comes from. And so then we end up with cheap products here in America. And is that really progress? You know, this is progress, what we've called progress, but it all happened so fast. And I think it's worth considering how we got here and if it's right. And are there some ways that we might be able to pump the brakes and kind of look back and course correct a little bit. So just some things to ponder there. And it's not just in gold supply chains. I think this is an issue that touches many sectors. Yeah, just again, thanks for your time.
Thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. There's the famous saying that there's no free lunch, but we can also adapt it to say there is no cheap stuff. Nothing is cheap. Somebody's paying something for what looks cheap to us. Maria Valeria, if you wish.
Well, I hope you can listen to me because I lost you again. Are you listening?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, I like the idea that Charlie shared about that this issue showed that we are all connected. I think that the right of nature also showed that. It's a way to think that we're all connected, and there is like a new translation into the legal file about this idea. So it's like an open door to think about or to rethink or to think again our relation with nature. And I think that is maybe it's appear like a very technical legal thing, and it's not only that, it's like a new idea that is very related with other worldviews that are presented in our planet, and that maybe they have something very important to say about the future of our planet and how to arrive to a future to our planet, taking into account all the environmental problems that we are living, and the very difficult scenarios that we are seeing now.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks, Ben, Charlie, the organizers, the attendees. This was inspiring and informative. It went way too fast. That was a pleasure. I hope we can keep it up. So this is it's very good work for everyone, and it was a pleasure.